Hi. Hello, LinkedIn. Hi, Alice. It's so good to see you.
Hi, yeah, we haven't talked for ages. I always like any excuse to get to chat to you.
Same here. I am your biggest fan. I must mention your work at least once a day in some format, whether I'm, after giving a speech, people want resources, or on my podcast, the Healthy Mind Toolkit, the Anxiety Toolkit, right, were your first two books. And now you have a new book, Stress-Free Productivity. And I'm so excited to talk about it. But how are you? How are you surviving? You have a 6-year-old at home, and you've just gone through a book process.
Yeah, so I have a fairly low-key life, right? I focus on a few things. So basically, I wrote the book for the best part of a year, and that was pretty much that. And raising the 6-year-old were pretty much all that I was doing. And we've been, the pandemic's created lots of winners and losers, but in a way, I've been a loser. In a way, I've been a winner because we're from New Zealand, and my spouse is a medical doctor in New Zealand, and so she usually lives like kind of 2/3 of the year here in the US with us, and then spends about 4 months back in New Zealand working every year. But because the border's been closed for 2 years, she hasn't worked for 2 years. So I've had full-time childcare, an extra person around for 2 years. So that's made the work things easy, and money and all that really hard.
That is a really tough one. I can see. Wow. Okay, I want to say to our audience, if you have a question, chat in the little chat thing I see from Ahmed. Hello. And we will get to it. This is a session for you. This is meant to be an interactive session. I'm going to ask some questions of Alice, but if you have questions, bring them on. Alice, I wanted to ask you, what are we getting wrong about productivity? I mean, I have on my desk, at least, or in my office, probably 3 books on being productive. Like, it's a very American thing to want to be productive. It's a very, I think, global thing to want to be productive. It's part of our culture. But what are we getting wrong about it?
Yeah, it's a human thing to want to be productive,
Yeah.
right? That it's one of we have the urge to work, the urge to play, and the urge to rest, and all those urges are adaptive in their own ways, right? They're all adaptive parts of being humans, and you see different animals have those different urges too. Like a lion, a lion spends most of its day lying around in the sun, lazing around in the sun, and then jumps into action. So we all have those the urge to. No one has to worry that they don't have the urge to be productive, because it's kind of, in an evolutionary sense, it's really built in. I think that there's a lot of, so the book goes through lots of myths about productivity. One of them is that speed is really important. So
Mhm.
one of the big kind of premises of the book is the idea that well, this is another myth actually, so people think that goofing off is the main enemy of productivity, but I argue that it's not goofing off that's the main enemy. The main enemy is doing things that are mildly or moderately important, right? So work worth doing is work that has the potential to change your life or someone else's life, right? But we exhaust ourselves doing things that are just mildly or moderately important. And oftentimes when you think about it, speed only matters if what you're doing is not very important, right? So if you're going to do like a super lucrative real estate project,
Mhm.
you can afford to take a bit longer to do that, right? But if you're doing a project that's going to make like 15 grand, whether you finish it super quickly or a little bit longer will make a big difference, right? So you can think of this on big levels and small levels, like something that you do that's really important. Whether it takes you 4 hours or 2 hours doesn't really matter. 12 months or 6 months doesn't really matter. It only matters if it's not really important and you shouldn't really be doing it anyway.
But what if you have a deadline? Like, what if your publisher's like, I want the book April 1st, which I have a deadline.
Yeah. So long term, those kinds of projects, like things like books, right, where they are a long term project where you're trying to do something that makes a big impact. That's the kind of project that matters, right? I think everybody should have some sort of kind of multi-year project that they're working. My lights just turned off. That they're working. That a battery, I think. That they're working. No, it's back on. That they're working toward, and that deadlines have their benefits. Deadlines are useful for, especially for anxious people, for helping them not overcomplicate tasks. Like there's this thing called the mere deadline effect, where if something has a long deadline or no deadline, we tend to overcomplicate it. We're willing to invest more resources in it just based on the deadline, not based on the actual complexity or the actual nature of the task. And what happens for anxious people is that we tie ourselves in knots about those kinds of things, right? So a deadline can force us to simplify, can mean that we can't overcomplicate it. So deadlines can be really useful for that, for helping you not overcomplicate things beyond the level that's useful. If they're sort of if deadlines are kind of right sized to a project, then they can be useful. But what they're not useful is if what they do is tunnel us into prioritizing what's not very important over what's really important, because a lot of times it's the more important stuff that doesn't have a deadline.
Yeah,
has a long one.
It's funny, as an anxious person, I for example, if a client is on deadline and I need to write the something by tomorrow morning, I have no issues. I know that I'm going to get it done, and my adrenaline's going, and it's great. My mind doesn't have time to ruminate and overcomplicate. Melissa has a great question. Do you think getting up really early and having morning habits are essential to be productive? And if so, what habits do you suggest?
Yeah, so if you read the book, that you're going to see that I make quite a lot of fun of that concept. So
early bird gets the worm.
Yeah. So one of the things that would not be me if that was the case, because I'm a super night owl. One of the things is that in some ways these are kind of tied together, right? That we all know that whether you're a night owl or an early bird is part of temperament, and another part of temperament is how much you need routines, right? How much you thrive on consistency versus how much you like spontaneity. Now, I'm someone who is wired to detest too much routine. I absolutely hate too much routine. And there are, so most products, sort of going back to what you're saying, what do we get wrong about productivity? We're really shown one model of being productive, right? It's the white guy, right? We all know who those productivity writers are, that write about productivity in a way that is like, has all this hidden privilege in it, right? This sort of idea that you can only do great work if you're undistracted. Well, I've got a 6-year-old, like, who needs me sometimes, like people who are women and other, groups without as much privilege are more likely to need to do work while they're with distractions, right? There are plenty of people out there that don't have office doors that close, or don't have office doors at all.
Or don't have the time to sort of self-optimize around the productivity, right? Like
We're frozen. Yeah. Are we coming back?
Oh, did you drop out? I think we lost Alice for a second.
We're back?
Are you? Yeah, you're back.
We froze. I don't know whose fault that was, or whose internet company's fault it was, but we're back. So whether you thrive on consistency and routine is something that's very personal to you. It's part of your wiring. And I don't think we really see that, because we get the models of productivity that we're presented with are people who are writing mostly from their own experience, who are of that type, right? So there's a super interesting conversation between Reese Witherspoon and Ina Garten on Twitter recently. And Reese was saying, I picked up all these awesome habits. She was really in that model of somebody who thrives on your traditional good habits, right? Mm-hmm. And Ina Garten was coming in and saying, actually, what I've been doing is lazing around in bed and doing this and that. Now, Ina Garten's obviously super successful. We'd all love to be Ina Garten, right? There are different routes to productivity that a lot of, especially people with depression or anxiety or those kinds of issues, or just anyone that doesn't feel like they can meet that stereotype of the productive person, often has productivity shame and fears that they're not going to be able to have the successes that they want to, because they just don't feel like they can meet that weird productivity standard that we've been kind of sold. So habits and that kind of thing can be extremely useful for some people, but they're less so for others. And it really depends on getting to know yourself. And in the book, you're sort of saying people don't have time to optimize themselves. Well, the book is really about self-knowledge, and it is teaching you ways to learn about yourself that are, I think, probably pretty different from the kinds of self-optimization you've seen in, Atomic Habits and those kinds of books, which are great. And in a way, like Atomic Habits is a great book about how habits are formed, right? It's great on that. But habits is this tiny area within behavioral psychology. There are a lot more areas of psychology. It's not meant as a manifesto for how you should live your life. And I don't even think the authors put it out there like that. Put things out there like that. But especially in America, people have this if something is good, more is better. And really take it just over extrapolate and think, well, if habits are good and if habits have some value, then we should stack a whole day. A whole day should be this habit stack from when we wake up in the morning to when we go to bed. And it's like, no.
One of the things I love about the book, and hello, Jameson. Jameson says hello. I can't comment to you, so comment to me and I will ask your question if you have a question. Laura, I see your question. I'm going to get to it in 1 second, but I just wanted to say that one of the things that Alice talks about, which I love so much, and I'm actually probably guilty of, is when you read a self-help article, in a magazine, or you see an author and you sort of bristle at the habits. Like for me, I bristle at the people who get up at 4:30 in the morning, right? Because I'm like, that would be torture for me. And you just sort of put it out there, Alice. You're like, yeah, we do bristle at that because it may not fit us. It doesn't mean that we can't be productive. I just want to ask Laura's question. Laura says, do you think that an excessive focus on being effective and productive leads us to forget our humanity and that we're not a product?
That is an excellent question. Like almost like you've read this book already, because that's such a so kind of no. In the sense that I think that we can learn to be productive as humans rather than, so there's this very much this idea that the productive person is the person that's sort of emotionless, that it's all about being more like a robot. The more consistent that you are, the better, right? But the book really shows you how you can be more productive through being more human, not through being more robotic. So for example, we know that people who are happy, healthy, both in all senses, productive, they don't tend to try and minimize their negative emotions. What they do instead is they know how to channel all their emotions in service of their goals. So if they feel guilty or anxious or overwhelmed or jealous or whatever it is, they know how to channel those emotions in the service of their goals rather than letting those emotions derail them from their goals. So if you know how to do that, you don't need to get rid of the emotions, and that's not what successful people do. So it's not, we don't need to be emotionless robots.
Okay, I'm going to pick an emotion and I want you to tell me how we channel it in service of our goals. How about anxiety?
Yeah, so anxiety, and I know you know this really well, but one of the things that I talk about in my first book, which is the Anxiety Toolkit, is how anxiety is you can channel anxiety in the direction of conscientiousness, or you can channel it in the direction of rumination and perfectionism and avoidance and tying yourself in knots, right? So anxiety makes us hypervigilant. It makes us aware of everything that could go wrong, right? And having that sort of, if you imagine somebody who's anxious, sort of scanning the environment for things that could go wrong and thinking ahead, the environment both right now and in the future, right? That is a really useful person to have in your tribe. Okay, so something that I'm never someone that's going to plan an outdoor wedding with no backup plan for the weather or whatever. Or I know that like when I travel, I will always look at the street view of the streets around the hotel that I'm staying at if I'm going to an unfamiliar city before I go, because if I want to know, like if the Uber driver doesn't know exactly where to drop me off, I want to be able to point that out, right? Wow. And so there are ways to channel anxiety into conscientiousness. That's a really typical one. The other thing is just obviously anxiety. A lot of people can easily blow. So anxious people get a thought in their mind and can't let it go, right? Now that's really useful if the thought in your mind is, oh, I really should get that colonoscopy, or, those kinds of things. I really should, if it's a nagging thought about something that is useful for you to do, right? That it's actually kind of useful not to be able to just blow that thought off in the way that a lot of other people can. So if you know the good parts of the, if you know the quote unquote upsides of anxiety, you can understand a bit better when it's helpful to you and when it's not.
I think that's really good. Checking Street View is actually a level beyond me. I'm very, very impressed with that.
Yeah, well, everybody has their own and we're not just anxious people, right? We also have these other aspects to our nature. And so that influences the way we channel our anxiety. The other aspects of your nature will influence how it's a strength and how it's a weakness for you.
I want to talk a little bit about deep work.
Yeah.
Because I think deep work, which I think Dr. Cal Newport coined, I think is such a relevant concept for right now for people who work in front of a computer, because we're home or we're overworking because we're anxious. We are more invested in ping work. I email you, you email me, I email you, you email me, and getting to deep work. And we have home distractions and the world is scary. So is getting into deep work a habit? How do you handle getting into deep work in the book?
Yeah, so deep work so when I'm book writing, I really rely on a deep work habit, right? I usually write for two sessions a day, at minimum one session a day, like each weekday, right? And what I do is I know from observing myself that I can do up to an hour of admin stuff in the mornings before I start my deep work session without it impacting my deep work session. So this is just what I've worked out personally for me, and what I'm suggesting is people work out what's personally true for them. So if I've got and whether it's life admin or work admin, I can do up to an hour of admin. Then I get into my deep work session, and my deep work session is usually about 2.5 hours. But I would not want to do that permanently, right? That's something that I employ when I'm book writing, when I've got a big project where a deep work habit is really useful for it. And we know that having consistent habits like that, like the benefit of those kinds of habits, that it reduces the self-control needed to do that thing. So habits make behaviors more automatic. Like, for example, if you're someone that goes to the gym after work every day, right? If you do that every day, you just kind of find yourself driving to the gym. Like it just becomes more automatic. And when behaviors become more automatic, they take less self-control. And that means that we can do them no matter what the other distractions are, or we can do them no matter what kind of mood we're in. Like it makes them, they become like safe. Deep work habits can become like safe harbors to dock in, even when you're things are going on in your life, rather than being like you have to fight yourself to get you to do your habit. And those benefits of a habit only kick in after a few months of doing something consistently. And it's really important. It's in the same. Your deep work habit can't be, I'm going to do deep work every day, but today I'm going to do it at 11 and tomorrow I'm going to do it at 3. It has to conform to the way habits work, where it fits into your day in the same kind of sequence.
Same place, same smell. Like, do you have to cue other ways?
Yeah. So yes, but you can just make those up, however you want them. Like one of the things I was doing when I was book writing was, so I know that I write rubbish after about 2 hours of writing. I start to just overly massage certain sections in a way that I sort of lose the forest for the trees kind of thing. So I know that I really should limit it to like 2 to 2.5 hours. So what I would do is I would set timers on my Google Home for 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and 2 hours. And part of the benefit of that was it was a cue. It was just part of starting my routine. I'd sit down I work in bed. So because I have a 2-bedroom house. I have a small house, and so I would 1,100 square foot house. So that would be part of the cue. But the other thing that's really useful is that I know that the first hour of my work, if I get distracted, like if my kid needs something or if my spouse asks me something, I can fairly easily snap back in that first hour. But in the second hour, I have to be more protective of my concentration to be able to keep going. I'm just more easily taken off on a tangent in that second hour. So that was a cue for me. People talk about these things like, oh, you should work in work clothes, or there aren't specifics, right? That it's anything that you can pair anything together and make it a cue.
I love that. Question from the audience. I would love to hear your opinion on meditation. Do you think it's beneficial for productivity?
Sure, yeah, it can be, sure. If that's that. The reason I call I either call my books toolkits in the titles or the subtitles is the idea that you should have this big basket of tools, right? And that when you have this big basket of tools, you'll have a tool that will work for any situation. Like I always say, you should have maybe like 6 or 7 different strategies for procrastination, and there'll be one that feels doable and relevant if you've got that many in most situations, right? So meditation is something that you can have in your toolkit if it's something that appeals to you. But I don't think it's like this. I don't think there's virtually anything where a deep work habit kind of comes closest. But I don't think there's anything where it's like, well, there's only one route, right? If you want to be somebody who's really focused and can see the big picture, then then meditation is essential. I don't think there's anything that's essential for that. I think that like Gretchen Rubin's somebody who's, super, super productive, and she talks about how meditation is just not for her. So, I'm not, what I discourage is people sort of that round peg square hole thing. If something, that you really want to experiment and find what works for you, but it's okay to reject advice that doesn't work for you, that you've tried a few times.
We don't want meditation shaming.
Yeah.
That is not the point. I have found that meditation is really hard for me, but doing breathing is not. And so I do 4-7-8 breathing, and that's like, I don't know, for some reason it just works for me. And it's so great, Alice, to hear your approach, which is like, every person has their own tools, and you have a bunch of tools ideally, and you make use of what works for you.
Yeah. And the big thing is that you should, exactly what you're saying, like your tools should be things that you customize to. Your most useful tools will be things that you highly customize to yourself. So most like experts on things, they don't do things how they recommend them to beginners. Like, let's say, somebody who's an expert real estate investor, and they'll say, when you cost out a project, you should do it like this. But what they do is just do a walkthrough with their contractor, and they, know from all their experience that, whether something is a go or not. So part of the way you can judge whether you are
I think she's frozen again. Hang tight. She'll be back. We've been having a little bit of freezing. Sorry, froze again. We got there.
Yeah, so you want to strip these things down. That the written versions, the versions that appear in books and yada, 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 are all much more complicated and formal sounding than the real way that people use these things in their lives.
So I want to close out our live with something that you have really changed my life when I first spoke with you several years ago for my podcast, which is applying heuristics. And I will write a banner, because it's not like a word that most of us use every day. What is an heuristic? A heuristic? An heuristic?
And heuristic, yeah. So a heuristic is a rule of thumb, but one time I used the term rule of thumb, and people told me that one person told me that it had this racist overtones or whatever. So I don't know any way other to explain it, but it's a rule of thumb. It's something that's designed to produce good results most of the time, but not all of the time, right? So I talk about one that I use, which is when I'm an underbuyer. So I don't buy enough of things. So like when I go to the supermarket, if my urge is buy 4 yogurts, I'll buy 6 yogurts because I know I have a tendency to underbuy things. Now, sometimes occasionally that results in overbuying something, but most of the time it just corrects for that natural tendency that I have. With perfectionism, a really good one is to pick a number out of 10, right? And think, if I have 10 urges to be perfectionistic, how many times will I give in to that urge? And you might say, well, 3 times out of 10 I'll give into it, or 7 times out of 10 I'll give into it. But pick a number for yourself, and then reject the urge the other times, whatever you've decided, so that you're sort of at least slightly optimizing and training that flexibility, that behavioral flexibility.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the heuristic that I use most frequently is timing the amount of time I'm going to spend on a project. Because as a perfectionist, I could end up spending 10 hours on something that needed 5 hours. And so my heuristic is this kind of work, you're going to give it this much and see how you are at the end of it. And it's just been so helpful.
Yeah. And so that's, all of this is really the thrust of all of my books, but in terms of productivity, this latest one is it's really about self-knowledge, that your productivity system is something that it will be this creative endeavor, right? It won't be something that you pick up out of a book that somebody else has written, and that what you see as your weaknesses so we all know that creativity arises from constraints, right? And your weaknesses that in aspects of your personality are like constraints, and so your most creative solutions are going to come from working around those.
I love that. Well, thank you for being with us. I'll show everyone the book one more time. You can get it wherever you get your books.
Cool.
And thanks, Dr. Alice Boyes.
Cool. Thank you. This is the old one. This is the new one. And if you see this one with like non-slanted writing, it's the British copy. So choose your own adventure.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Americans apparently like slanty writing, and British people apparently like
italics
writing.
We do. Be well. Bye, everyone.
Bye.